In search of my grandfather's former porch, I heard the thunderous roar of the bulldozer's motor. I heard tires screeching on gravel just as the operator had begun digging. Patricia Hendress was outstripped by a silver vehicle that screeched too. A stop and waved papers like battle flags above her head. She yelled at my employees to halt right away, her voice piercing the morning air with an angry tone. 3 further vehicles arrived behind her, each transporting a different Meadow View. HOA board member? I took a quick look at the utility shed 50 feet distant, where my property was connected to the neighborhood's main electrical junction. They were unaware of what was about to happen. I'm Ethan Garrett, and I inherited my grandfather's 180-year-old property on Crystal Lakes beaches 2 months ago. Our family had owned the land since 1845, long before suburban expansion spread to this region of the state. Grandpa Jack had observed the development of the surrounding neighborhoods, had silently kept to himself on his 40 acres of immaculate waterfront property since he saw the HOA form in 1998. He left everything to me, his only grandchild, who had studied the property, the lake, and the fragile ecosystem that flourished there for summers. I had relocated from the city in order to rehabilitate the ranch and pay tribute to him. Rebuilding the irrigation pond that had dried up 20 years prior was the first task on my agenda. Water management wasn't the only issue. Numerous bird, frog, and native plant species used to call the pond home. Children from nearby schools used to come here for nature education. I started building a lovely quarter-acre pond that would connect to the current stream system after hiring an environmental expert and obtaining all the required county permits. At that point, I got to know Patricia Hendress, the Meadow View HOA president, and the most conceited person I had ever met. In her huge eyeglasses and pressed pants suit, she marched across my property line on the 3rd day of construction. In a patronizing manner, she introduced herself and clarified that although my property was not officially a part of the HOA, the architectural committee had to approve any improvements that could be seen from the road. I kindly told her that I had all the required county permissions and that my land was a century and a half older than the HOA. The HOA had standards to uphold, so it didn't matter, she remarked with a dismissive shrug. Patricia intensified her campaign against my pond throughout the course of the following 2 weeks. The official cease and desist letter, which stated that the pond would draw mosquitoes and devalue properties, came first. She then began a petition, going from door to door to inform neighbors that I was making a swamp. She put security cameras on the property boundary to record every worker, every truck, and every dirt pile. Every day she would make fictitious complaints about noise infractions and environmental harm to the county inspector. The inspector, who had previously given his okay, began to apologize each time he had to leave. Patricia would lecture about the risks of my pond during emergency HOA meetings. With a dramatic tone, she asserted that I was ruining Meadowview's aesthetic harmony, that children could drown, and that the community would flood. She even engaged a lawyer to look for a way to stop me. She would react angrily when neighbors brought up the fact that my property was not a part of the HOA, saying that everyone was impacted by community standards. The pivotal moment occurred as I was going through my grandfather's old records. A utility easements folder was hidden in a filing cabinet. I discovered a 50-year-old contract inside that chilled me to the bone. My property was connected to the entire Meadowview subdivision's electrical system. My grandfather and the developers had an agreement when they were building the neighborhood. They would maintain the access road in exchange for a utility easement. Here's the worst part, though. The latest renewal of the lease, which had a 25-year term, had ended 3 years prior. I could legally deny access at any moment. To confirm my findings, I engaged David Simmons, a property lawyer. He enthusiastically affirmed that I was sitting on a wealth of leverage. The HOA had never bothered to verify that their own infrastructure was legally secured since they were too busy bugging me about the pond. In order to give the HOA 48 hours to either stop all harassing and recognize my property rights or lose, Electrical service to 120 homes. David prepared a formal notice of easement revocation. At the upcoming HOA board meeting, I personally presented the notification to Patricia. There were many folks at the community center who she had mobilized against me. She was in the middle of a dramatic statement explaining how my pond will turn into a haven for West Nile virus. I went to the board table as soon as I entered and put the envelope in front of her. She opened it with a displeased look that soon turned to bewilderment and then fear. As she read the legal document, her face turned white. Patricia attempted to bluff me. With a wobbly yet forceful tone, she stood up and declared that this was obviously an illegal threat, and she would be contacting the police, although they might be more interested in her harassment campaign and bogus claims to county officials. I politely replied that she was welcome to do so. As the board members shared the document among themselves, the room was alive with perplexed whispers. When they realized the consequences and their lawyer wasn't there, fear began to set in. I was standing in my property's utility shed 47 hours and 55 minutes later. Patricia had been feverishly phoning the electricity company, attorneys, and even the mayor's office for 2 days. However, the law was unambiguous. I was perfectly justified in denying access because the easement had expired. She tried everything, including bribery and intimidation, and even showed up at my home at midnight pleading with me to change my mind. I reminded her that my only goal was to construct my pond quietly. I flicked the main breaker on the deadline at precisely noon. When the power to the entire Meadowview subdivision was switched out, the metal shed reverberated with a pleasant click. My phone began to ring in a matter of seconds. I chose to ignore it and continued walking back to where my construction team was completing the retaining wall around the pond. With a worried tone, the foreman questioned if I was certain of this. I advised him to continue working. The following 3 hours were chaotic. Patricia showed up with half the neighborhood and the entire HOA board. People were yelling about security systems, dead phones, and rotten food. With a frantic tone, Patricia yelled that I was a terrorist, that I had ruined their lives, and that she would sue me for all I owned. I politely reminded them that I had given them 48 hours' notice to respect my property rights and to stop pestering me. They decided to disregard it. When the power company showed up, they validated my presumptions. Without access to my land, they were unable to restore power, and I was not required by law to supply it. Because of the age of the subdivisions, infrastructure rerouting would require weeks and hundreds of thousands of dollars. The crowd's ire shifted from me to Patricia as the truth set in. In an accusatory tone, the residents began to question her about why she had sparked this, why the HOA hadn't kept up appropriate easements, and why she had wasted time berating me rather than defending their rights. That evening, an emergency HOA meeting was scheduled. The community center had to be lit by a generator. Although I wasn't present, I later learned about what transpired from my neighbors. Patricia attempted to keep things under control by defensively, claiming that she had been defending property values, but one resident after another spoke out against her behavior. They described how she had disregarded legitimate concerns in order to further personal grudges, and how her power outbursts had now rendered them helpless. There was a unanimous vote. Patricia was promptly dismissed from her position as HOA president. The board then decided to pay my legal fees, formally apologize to me, and admit that my home was exempt from all HOA regulations. Additionally, they committed to paying fair market value for a suitable utility easement. After the written agreements were personally presented by Robert Chun, the new board president, a sensible man, I regained control that evening. I completed my pond during the course of the following month. It exceeded my expectations in every way. The sunlight caused the water to shimmer. Birds and fauna returned in a matter of weeks, and native vegetation grew around the margins. First came the great blue heron, followed by ducks and scores of other species. I made it accessible to neighbors who wished to take in the scenery. By installing benches and a little walking trail, like in my grandfather's day, the local elementary school reached out to me about delivering scientific classes. Patricia lost her position of authority quickly and completely.